On April 25th, Nagayan Dharmalingam was hanged.
Singapore's death penalty for drug trafficking has come under the spotlight once again.
Kalwan Singh has been executed in Singapore today.
The second issue Mr. Shanmugam speaks about, the death penalty, which punishes offenders of serious crimes like drug trafficking, murder and use of firearms.
Capital punishment is like the extreme example of how punitive a society can be and how harsh and cruel we can be to each other. It's a system where we are like, the more we make you suffer, the more we are delivering some sort of justice or revenge. But what harm are we actually repairing when someone is hanged?
I think a lot of us do not understand or cannot prove where life comes from. So that being the case, I find it very difficult to grapple with capital punishment. Ultimately, guilt or innocence of a person is determined in court, which would involve a lot of factors. What is the evidence against the person? What are the inferences? This whole process is human. Mistakes may happen. And that's another reason why I'm against capital punishment, because it's irreversible.
I got started in 2010 and I realized that the death penalty doesn't work in the way that I had assumed that it did. You know, I was very uncomfortable with the way that the law was worded.
Because the law has certain presumptions. If you're found with more than a certain amount of drugs, you're presumed to have it for the purposes of trafficking. You're also presumed to know what type of drug it is. So you start from the basis that you are, to a certain extent, guilty, and you have to prove your innocence. Of course, in any criminal case, you're up against the state. The state has got far more resources than we do. The state has investigating arms, such as the CNB, the police, at their disposal. We can only work with what evidence we are given by them.
But in 2012, they did amend the Misuse of Drugs Act so as to introduce some narrow criteria in which the courts can decide to sentence somebody to life imprisonment and caning instead of death. So this narrow criteria is like, if you are only a drug courier and you substantively assisted or cooperated with the authorities in disrupting drug trafficking, or if you have what they call an abnormality of mind that actually impaired your mental responsibility for the act. So in these very narrow circumstances, someone might be able to not be sent to death row. We know that there are over 60 people on death row at the moment, and that the vast majority of them are there for drug offences.
On the one hand, you have what we could commonly term the drug mules. They are usually very poor, and they are made use of by the syndicates to bring in quantities of drugs for very, very small reward to bring in drugs. On the other hand, you have an older group of people. They themselves are drug users. If you're hooked on heroin, it's difficult to keep a stable job, and they still have to feed their drug habit. So they resort to trafficking themselves. It is the minorities who unfortunately seem to be overrepresented in these type of offences.
I feel like people should pay for the crimes that they commit.
So I'm from America, so personally I think the death penalty is a little bit strict here.
I don't think the death penalty will ever be abolished in Singapore.
There's a reason why Singapore is so safe.
I think it should be abolished because the vast majority of hangings in Singapore has been over drugs, and usually the people who are caught for it are the mules, the drug mules, and poor people and minorities are very disproportionately affected.
It's more important to help those people move along and cope with rehabilitation, and also like help them cope with the reasons why they are even turning to drugs in the first place. I think that would be better.
They were not the rich, evil, criminal drug lords and kingpins that we are given the impression that they are. You know, so many people on death row come from, very desperate and marginalized circumstances.
If you don't consider how guilt or innocence is determined, or if you don't interact with the people who are and their families who are facing the death penalty, it is easy to then say that if there's capital punishment, it must be a stronger deterrent and so lesser offences. It follows logically from a logical point of view, but you're missing out on the human element.
Nazir is my elder brother. He's my best brother. He is not a violent person. He's a weak person. He's easily influenced. So at the age of 40, with no guidance, we are very poor. She got hooked to drugs at the age of 40. But not till lately, he was charged for trafficking and he was hanged. I was expecting just a life sentence. Even if he's given a life sentence, I'm quite happy. At least I can see my brother every now and then, he's dead. Two officers in full uniform went and hand a letter to my younger brother, but I don't receive a letter, I only receive a handphone call on Friday. But how can you hang a person on this Friday, but you inform him last Friday? It's 1 week notice. It's too short. That's why I don't understand, as though he want to really hang my brother as soon as possible.
The prison will usually give the family 7 days warning that there will be an execution. They'll ask the families to fill this form and tell us the license plate number of the hearse from the funeral company that will come and pick up the body. You can buy up to 4 sets of clothing for your loved one for them to wear in a final photo shoot before they are hanged. And then they'll be hanged at usually around 6 a.m.-ish, and about 9 or 10 a.m. the families will be asked to enter the prison to identify and claim the body. It's really a horrible experience in which, your loved one is alive and they're asking you to make all these funeral arrangements.
I went as far as writing a letter, email to our president for leniency, for clemency. It goes for deaf ear. I went to Istana to see if the letter is also deaf ear. They will not budge. And I even called a lawyer for last-minute lawyer to help me to ask for extension. The lawyer is very nice. He said, Nas, don't waste your money, Nas. There's no way we can help. The lawyer told me. In fact, I have to pay. I'm prepared to pay. No wasting your money.
It's really, really difficult to find lawyers who are willing to take up late-stage cases, the ones who have exhausted the regular trial and appeal process. There have been examples in recent years where lawyers who file late-stage applications are accused of abusing court process.
If you take out a last-minute application and there's no legal basis for the application, the court can order you to pay the prosecution's costs because you're wasting the prosecution's time.
For a lot of lawyers, this is a big, risky thing to do. Then we are just making the system even more vulnerable to the possibility of wrongful executions.
We form a group. The person whose siblings are also in the death row, we have formed a group. They also was like me, trying to appeal and appeal was rejected. And the NGO group is trying to call the media to do something about it.
I do a lot of writing and storytelling around the death penalty to bring the issue closer to people, right? To humanize the people who are most directly affected by death penalty. Because a lot of people who say that they are pro-death penalty don't actually really know how the death penalty works in Singapore. We crowdfund money and we help them pay for the flights. And if it comes to the worst, we help them pay for funerals as well. Because a lot of families actually really struggle to deal with these costs.
For every potential death row case you take up, the stress is enormous. You have to be prepared to undertake that burden because if you lose, the consequences are severe.
I've been to more funerals than I would like to think about. Every time there is an execution, it's a reminder of every other execution. For me, the most difficult time is like the day after an execution. As long as there's life, there's hope that something could happen, but then the day after an execution is when the hope has nowhere to go but turn into grief, right? Because there's just nothing.
It is difficult to move on, especially the younger clients or the Singaporean clients. Sometimes you see them quite often in preparation for the case. Some are funny, jovial, despite the predicament they are in. And you never forget their personality, their traits, their humor.
It's a fair assumption to say that more people will traffic drugs into Singapore, more drugs will enter into Singapore, there will be more drug abusers in Singapore, and more Singaporean families and individuals will be harmed if we remove the death penalty.
The government is extremely stubborn and determined to retain the death penalty and to stick to the narrative that they have, even though a lot of research and expert opinion from around the world suggests very, very strongly that the death penalty works in deterring the drug trade. It's not true. I don't see them listening to activists or engaging properly with our points, but I feel like they are aware of what people are saying, and they are aware of the international image that Singapore has when we hang people.
No country wants to be the subject of protests, demonstrations, bad press. So they do care, but I think they are of the view that what they're doing is correct, and external pressure will not make them change their mind. Government has to consider everyone's views. Government also has to consider what they believe now to be the best for Singapore. I'm quite certain it will eventually be abolished. It will take time. Sufficient number of people will have to change their minds about it. It's a slow and gradual move in that direction.
Naziri bin Lajim. Chu Peng Quinn. Azwin bin Muhammad Tap.
When we first had that anti-death penalty protest in Hong Lim Park in April, I really didn't think many people would come. And then 400 people came. For me, it was very encouraging because it kind of showed that these 10 years have not been in vain.
I still support the group that I am with now to abolish the hanging system. I always pray and pray that there's a change. Yeah, I still have hope.
What society is discarding as what we think are criminals, to their families, these are full people, right, and full lives. I think we need to really go back to the drawing board and think about actually what harm and what suffering are we trying to address, and to create an environment where people can voluntarily seek treatment and help.
I believe eventually we will get there. We'll find better, more sophisticated ways to deal with the drug problem, which, is a problem if it's not controlled. Capital punishment may not be the best or only way.
Coconuts TV.